Well, I'm not going to be accusatory of any of us. I would just say, though, as Americans, we've known we had the problem. But on the other hand, if you were to suggest to a family that an SUV or a semi-truck or something of this variety is unlikely to be an economical vehicle, they would say, well, we know that. But at the same time, this is helpful. We have a family. We want to get everybody around and so forth. So if we only get 10 miles to the gallon, that's too bad. But nevertheless, gasoline prices are usually fairly low. It's only when you get into a scare of this variety, everybody begins to recalculate, will we do spring vacation or not? No, it's just in the same as our houses. For a long time, Shar and I knew that the window panes and what have you in our house were simply passing through an awful lot of heat and cold, depending upon the season. And we had read about ways in which you might be able to renovate. And so 2 years ago, we did so. It was remarkable. First of all, the windows open and close easier than they used to. As time goes on, you may have found some problems there, too. So it is with just renovations that you make in your home that are efficient energy-wise, but also enhance the value of the property. In fact, make life more enjoyable for you. It's just as Americans, this has not been an urgent theme. It sort of bobs up from time to time. But we're talking today now about the comprehensive picture. And we are shipping, as I have pointed out, hundreds of millions of dollars, in some cases billions of dollars, to countries that are hostile to us in the world, that do not share our values, either religious values, political, democratic, human rights values, any of the above. We're keeping them in business. And so people say, well, foreign policy is not for me. I've got enough to worry about at home. But it sort of needs to be a little bit on our minds. This idea of energy independence is not just simply a patriotic surge. It really has to do with our security, which you just touched upon. Yes?
Given the world situation and also our fiscal situation, what do you think should take priority in terms of subsidies and support, petroleum issues or power issues?
Well, I suspect legislators will differ as to what kind of support is needed to spur various activities. And that's usually the rationalization given. For instance, in the home renovations, there have been a number of tax credits in recent years. Now they're running out at this point, but the idea was to encourage people by giving a tax credit if you did certain things. That certainly has been true in the development of corn ethanol, or the cellulosic ethanol experiments, or anything else that's an alternative fuel. And so there'll be debates in Congress, as there ought to be. Are the subsidies too great? Are they merited? After something is developed, you keep giving the subsidy? As a member of the Agriculture Committee, I've been one that has been rather stern on the subsidy issue. We've been attempting to get rid of all of them for years. My legislation got 38 votes in the Senate last time around with the Farm Bill. Not 51, but 38, making some headway. We felt, looking at agriculture, we needed a crop or farm insurance policy because there are weather problems and we don't want people to go under on that basis. But at the same time, we're making some headway. But I would just say this is sort of the nature of the American tax system. As people talk about reform of taxes, they know that there are thousands of pages with all kinds of so-called incentives, subsidies, and so forth. And they came about for good reason at the time, that somebody felt this might impel some constructive action, but we either forgot about it or those that were getting the subsidy didn't want to give them up, as the case may be. And so I think we're going to have sort of a surge in both ways as we become involved in the budget disputes, the deficits, the overwhelming debt of our country. We will be looking with a sharper eye at the subsidy situation because it clearly is an area that could be reformed. Yes? appreciate very much your family, what you're doing. That's the important thing. More power to you. Yes.
I'm interested to know if there's anything you've done with eucalyptus crops that are highly explosive in Australia, and I think are good combustible fuel beyond ethanol and corn. Also, looking at education programs to get more of the agricultural belt in families towards high-tech agricultural careers instead of going to the typical colleges.
Well, with eucalyptus, there certainly have been some laboratory experiments. I'm not aware how far they are along. I think the dilemma is almost the same as the so-called cellulosic debate, and that is even after we find something that is economical, the distribution system in this country is totally out of whack. Even with something, corn ethanol is not the last be-all and end-all of alternative fuel, but I would just say that the resistance of many oil companies to having any such thing on their premises is very difficult. And the problem physically of trucking it around or getting it by rail or so forth. You have much of the production in 15 states of the Union, but we don't have pipelines. So whether we go the eucalyptus route or some other, we'll get back to the same problem. How do you physically sell it, distribute it, get it, and then how do you have vehicles or whatever who can use it? Not insoluble, but this is going to take concentrated thought, which this has not been a part of our public process. Now, on the education of young people, it's an interesting point. I saw this raised not in an agricultural journal, but maybe it was the Wall Street Journal the other day, what have you. So sort of 5 questions that families ought to discuss before making a college choice. And one of them very clearly is the nature of the career that the young person might be involved in. Some people say, well, it's too early for me to think about that. I just want to get off to college and sort of grow up, and then we'll get to that. Or maybe during the course of those 4 years, something will come to mind. But many people are finding out that those years are fairly expensive years, either in terms of tuition the parents are paying or even if there's scholarship assistance. And furthermore, if it's supplemented by graduate studies, which the more technical regimes are probably going to require, that often results in loans that have to be repaid that are out there for quite some time. This is not just a question of a very few Americans. This is a big question. So it may be helpful from the beginning to think through the career train and then to match up with a university program that appears to offer something in that area or has people who are on the frontier if it's something that is very new. And at least the young person can find out at that point whether he or she really wants to do this fairly early on. And if so, off to a head start. And likewise, perhaps with even programs that call for study abroad under other conditions or other ways that may stimulate the imagination in a world that is getting smaller in which our young people are hopefully going to be leaders in that world. Yes, sir.
Is there any truth to what you see or hear on the internet about our own domestic Bakken oil reserves having more oil available to us than Saudi Arabia and Venezuela combined? And if so, why are we not pursuing it? Why do you not hear about it in the mainstream press?
Well, I've heard the reserves conceivably could be greater than Venezuela, maybe not greater than Saudi Arabia, but nevertheless, there are considerable reserves. And so the question is at what cost would be involved in getting to them, and the cost not only in money, but in environmental costs. Now, a lot of the debates are coming in that situation now. As we get into the shale oil fracking debate, the process is one in which some environmentalists believe that the water supplies in the general area of that business may be jeopardized. So, for example, where a fracking project is being proposed, and a large one for that matter, in Pennsylvania, there already is a huge dispute among people in that neighborhood or that area as to whether they want all that going on there. Now, we could say, well, my goodness, we're all going to have to contribute to this. This is a big country and a lot of oil reserve. And they would say, but not in my backyard. You know, off somewhere else where you don't have much population. So we're going to get into those sorts of arguments, quite apart from the investment that is required. But ultimately, that is going to have to lead to more of it happening in the United States, onshore as well as offshore. Because of the problems in the Gulf, we have had really a ban on offshore drilling now until very recently, in which the administration has decided to allow 2 permits to drill. Well, that's not going to work. And you know, my plea, without being belligerent about it, is we just have to move on. We have to do so with greater safety, greater engineering probity, but at the same time, those resources are very, very critical as a part of what we really have in this country. And then finally, to make your point, many people have found the further you get into it, the more you find that you have. If there has not been drilling in various areas, although there are surveys that estimate how much might be there, very frequently people are happily surprised. They find a great deal more. I remember taking a trip to Baku in Azerbaijan several years ago because in a strategic way, we were trying to move oil from Baku through Tbilisi to Ceyhan, and that would be oil then our NATO allies could use, as opposed to oil that was being held up by Russia, in essence. Well, in any event, off of Azerbaijan, as we were out there on the ships where they were drilling for oil, they were finding all sorts of things well beyond anything they anticipated. And that was true of natural gas resources, sort of adjacent there in the harbors and the farther you moved out. And I think we would have that same situation here. But we've had a pretty strong prohibition in many areas of this country to drilling or to looking for those resources.